So welcome everyone to another episode of Good Gig. I'm your host, Frank Stewart, and I'm joined tonight by my buddy, Jay Anseth, as usual. Jay, good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Frank.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again. And just to remind folks, Jay is in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful winter wonderland of Bozeman, Montana, and we're filming in recording in early January this time. And so Jay and I are delighted to welcome our guest, Mr. Ken Leach. So Ken Leach is a high school science teacher, specifically a high school oceanography teacher. And I should caveat that by saying he's recently retired, relatively recently retired. I guess it was 3 years ago now, something like that, Ken?
2.5 now. Yeah.
Okay, 2.5. Yeah. So as with most other professions, I think even after you retire, you're still that person. You just might not be doing it on a daily basis. So I think it's safe to call you a high school
Yeah,
science.
still working teacher workshops every summer.
So Ken, thank you for doing this. I'm really excited to have a teacher on tonight. I'm a teacher as well, a very different venue than what you teach in. So
Right.
I'm curious to have a little back and forth about things we like and don't like and strategies and whatnot. I think about teachers a lot to this day, and specifically those teachers that were formative for me when I was in high school. And I think that's the case for a lot of students. Those are very formative years as folks are developing and maturing. I enjoyed school. I did well in school, and I had generally really positive interactions with teachers. In fact, teachers are some of those individuals that remain role models for me to this day. And I think I'm not unique in that. I think a lot of students and a lot of young folks remember those authority figures like teachers or coaches as role models. So I think it's an incredibly valuable and, at least in some circles, an underappreciated profession that I think deserves as much attention as possible. I think educators are at the top of the list, at least the top of my list, of folks who truly have an influence on others in life. So maybe just tell us a little bit about the career arc of your profession, Ken. So have you always been a teacher?
Yes. And that started probably when I was 15, when I started teaching swimming lessons and doing that kind of thing. And it just evolved from there. But that was like summer jobs. And then I made it to college and I went to App State and I was a big skier, so I started in recreation management because I wanted to run my own ski resort. And eventually, the first semester I was there, unfortunately, one of the professors passed away, and they automatically gave everybody an A. And just like, we're going to stop everything, and here you have an A. And I'm like, that's not why I'm in school. And so I love biology. I've always loved biology. I'm always a kid that was collecting frogs, or we had a creek in our backyard when I was a kid. And so I dropped in and just talked to the people in biology and ended up being a biology naturalist major at App State and loved that. I took every ology class there was and got to go on some really cool trips and spend time on the Outer Banks or down in Florida and stuff. We traveled a lot because besides the salamanders up in Boone, North Carolina, that's the main thing they study in trout. So that was good. And then but coming out of college, it's not easy to find a biology naturalist job where you want to make some money. And so I struggled with that, but I ended up at Barrier Island Environmental Education Center on Seabrook Island, and I started working there as a naturalist instructor. And I remember I got $100 a week and room and board. But the cool thing is, my room was in the arts and crafts building, but the arts and crafts building was no less than or no more than probably, I'll say, 200 feet from the beach. And so it was in the dunes. And so there was dunes behind it. And so we take kids and walk down the beach and do like a mile beach walk. And take them down. And I just loved it. In the maritime forest, everything all around on Seabrook. And so that motivated me. And I realized, well, I didn't say when I was at Boone, I was also a ski instructor. And so I taught that as well. And so I've always taught, and that just, I just fell upon that and said, hey, I like teaching people. I like showing people, and it really helps you understand whatever you're interested in. If you have to explain it to somebody else, it makes you translate it in your own brain so you can tell other people about it. And so I really enjoyed it. I went to I applied for, it wasn't grad school, it was like just post graduation stuff just to get my teaching certificate at University of Georgia. I had a awesome professor. He knew that I wanted to be a teacher. He got me in, and that's when they were on the quarters. The first quarter, he got me in, and I took all these classes, the reading classes, the basic stuff you needed to get your teaching certificate for. And then the second semester, he actually got me into the classroom and had me student teaching. And he knew that I knew what I was doing, I guess. And it was cool because I wanted to bring the passion that I had for biology into the classroom. And then when I finished and I got my teacher's certificate, I got hired at the job I student taught. That was in 1986. And so when did I go back? I think I went back like in the late 1990s. I went back and started grad school at UGA and got my science certificate, my master's in science education. And then that followed up with a specialist in science education. When I got hired, I taught at middle school for 7 years. And then I went to another opening high school. So I helped open the high school. And that's when I started developing. I had the opportunity to develop the oceanography curriculum. I've been talking to the county department chair, and she said I could do it with another person. So we wrote the curriculum in 2000. And that's when I feel my career just blossomed, because I grew up on the Oregon coast when I was little. And so I played in tide pools. That was my aquariums when I was a little kid. I learned about tides by getting stuck in between two, points. Actually, in the Devil's Punch Bowl, we got stuck for 6.5 hours. I was stuck. And so my mom's screaming at me, and I'm like, we're okay. We're okay. I love the ocean. And so I got to do that. And that's where I really just dove into the curriculum, really learned it. I knew a little bit from childhood. I worked at Seabrook teaching the kids on field trips, but it was different in the classroom. So, with all the focus on wanting to learn or wanting to protect the ocean, I was like, you know what? When we teach this, we don't want to be cramming things down the kids' throats. We want to make it as fun as possible, as interactive as possible. We want them to love the ocean. And if they love the ocean, they might take care of it. And so that was the philosophy we went behind. And so that's when I really started trying to make really cool things to do in the classroom and giving them experiences that they may not have.
Yeah, those Oregon tide pools, it's interesting how common a narrative that is. I spent a lot of time on the Oregon coast as a kid, and I think fell in love with the ocean for that exact reason.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We would
I grew
drive
up
over.
right outside of Depot Bay just for a few years, but man, it just made such an impression. And my dad, when he passed, he wanted his ashes on the Oregon coast, because he would just sit there and watch the waves roll in. And we just got to do it it was actually right after we retired 2 years ago, and went out there, and it was just as fun going back there, when I'm 60s and playing. So
Oh, it's awesome. And it's so on display. I remember going, and you're exactly right. You can just see everything. You can see sea
right.
stars, sea anemones, urchins, sculpins, and tide pools. You have it all in front of you.
Yeah, it was really cool. The time difference was a problem, but I had my friend still teaching at the high school, and so I would FaceTime her, and she'd put me up on the screen, and so we'd talk about things we saw and the waves coming in and all that stuff. And then you'd have a seal pop its head up, or you'd see a spray of a whale or something, and it was really cool.
Oh, it's amazing. I love the coast. I love the Oregon coast. Like I was saying, we would go there as a kid from Reno, Nevada, which is where I grew up. And we'd only go for about a week every year, but it was probably my favorite week all year. I would just look forward to it. And the minute I got there, I liked it so much. I would start like counting the days until we would have to leave. So it's like, oh, we still have 7 days left. Oh, we have 6 days left. Oh no, we only have 2 days left. Yeah, I just loved it. I would wake my dad up at like 6 every morning to drag him onto the beach to go look at tide pools. So I
Yeah.
think we share a similar story. I certainly fell in love with the ocean there. So that oceanography curriculum in Georgia, Ken, that didn't exist until you made it.
In Gwinnett County, they had the gems for it, but it didn't. Maybe a year before we started, hey, we really want to do this. There was another teacher at another high school. Luckily, the county department head said go for it, but there was not very many teachers teaching it. Like maybe at the private schools,
Yeah.
Woodward Academy was teaching it, and maybe a couple others, but there wasn't very many.
I mean, I would think it's still a pretty unique course to be offered in high school. Like
Well, now in Gwinnett, thanks to me, I guess, it's probably, let's see, we probably have 18 or 19 high schools, and it's probably in 14, I'm guessing.
That's amazing, though. It must feel pretty special to have been the originator of that, at least in your county, and to see it mature into something that's so formative and
Yeah,
special.
it's a sense of pride for me. It's like my one huge, if I had to do something for the county or do something for the kids, I think I have made a difference, and now I'm teaching teachers to teach other students, but the way that we set up that class with these notebooks, these interactive notebooks, it was cool because they would do the notebook, but we would do it in such a cool way, bringing in art and pop-ups and everything I could think of to make the notebook interesting, that when they took it home, I wanted them, their parents or anybody that opened it up said, wow, this is really cool, because now I'm not just teaching the single student. Now I've reached out at least two people. The person, if the student explains it to the person that opens the book, or the person that opened the book asks questions to the student, then I have another one. So I don't know if this sounds great, but I saw them like minions almost, where I can teach them and they can have fun and learn the stuff and learn the curriculum, and then they can actually pass it on themselves and make a difference as well. So I am proud of what we did, and it's still going on. Like last year, one of the teachers that I taught and was like I was a mentor to, just won the county teacher of the year.
So I've always been kind of fascinated by this idea that people who are good at something, and so you can kind of cross realms from like a physical activity versus something that's like a theoretical, like a school subject. So you're very passionate about biology or oceanography, but then it's a very different thing to then be able to convey that knowledge or teach someone else how to either do it or how to learn about it. And so it in some cases it's kind of easy or easier, I would say, like if you met someone who's very similar to you, and like someone's really gung-ho about skiing and you're like, oh, I'm kind of doing, you're not really sometimes even hard to put into words like what you're doing when you're going down the mountain. It's like you just kind of, I just do it. That's not a very good way to teach someone. So it's just like how do you, what's the process for doing that? And then what you just taught, what you hit on there at the end is like, not only are you able to do that for a physical activity and a school-based subject, but you're also able to teach other people to teach. I don't know. It's kind of why I think it's kind of fascinating. And I don't know if what your mind, how do you think about that? Or how do you think about making that, all that work?
The first thing that comes to mind is just having the experiences, just opening it up. So like with the teacher workshops, just having the experience and show them my passion towards it. It hopefully it motivates them to do that. But that was with skiing too, because I had the experience. You can explain it. So like if you go to a ski school and the first words they use is pizza and French fries. When you're trying to slow down, you put your skis in the shape of a slice of pizza, or if you want to go fast, put them in French. Well, people can understand that, I guess, but it doesn't really tell them what they're doing. And so if you have experience, then you can explain it more in detail, or how they actually feel when they're going down the slope or whatever they're doing. And so it was a lot of storytelling, because when I was in grad school, I had so many cool experiences. It was mind boggling. And same with skiing. I mean, I grew up, I was on the Oregon coast, but then we moved towards Portland. So I got to ski, all the time on Mount Hood. And so I skied. And then my parents would take us out to Idaho for 10 days of the school year. And we'd ski there for 2 weeks. And, and then with the ocean stuff, once I started teaching at environmental Barry Island, then you just get that experience and you learn and learn and learn. Because I mean, I had the before I became a teacher, I was really interested in it. I'd go collect frogs or collect salamanders or crayfish or whatever it was, and look at them and shake the jar and see what would happen, and those kind of things the kids do. And I just love doing that. And so more experiences in college, and it exposed me, and that just makes you want to learn more, I think. I love a quote from Robert Ballard. He works, when he teaches stuff, he wants to see a jaw drop in kids. And he says, when you can get their jaw to drop, you can stuff as much knowledge as you can, as much as you have, you can stuff it in them, and they will, remember it, because it's such a cool experience. And so that's really what I try. I try to make them have fun or something. I want it to be experiential. I want them to do stuff. So this notebook, I made them work on it every single day. When I adopted the notebook, they really invested in it. I sold it so much the first week of school. I said, look at these cool things and look what you get to do. And yes, I was the bad teacher that collected their phone and didn't let them play on their phone. But they said, this class goes by so fast because we're so busy in it and we're doing that. But then we rewarded them, say, listen, if you do a great job in your notebook, you can use it on the test, because they're researching stuff during the class, or they're trying to find stuff and they're writing down their own ideas in the notebook as well. And so I just tried to build it up like that. And that really helped them and motivated them. Now with AI and all that, memorization's pretty much out the door. And so in a way, it was kind of preceding that. But I don't think kids need to memorize anymore, pretty much. I mean, if you're a naturalist, yes, you need to be able to walk around and tell them what animals it is. So that does take some memorization, but it's also, if you experience it, you don't really have to memorize it. You have the experiences. Oh yeah, I remember that.
So Ken, can you talk a little bit about the challenge of teaching multiple sections? So when I get up and lecture, and I don't spend nearly as much time in the classroom as you do, I lecture 3 times a week, or maybe at the most 6 times a week. And it invigorates me. I really enjoy being up in front of the classroom. I enjoy engaging with the students and having a back and forth question answer type session, a real discussion. That's something I very much value. And while it invigorates me, at the end of it, I'm kind of drained. Like
definitely.
It almost feels like a workout to some degree. And part of that is because I put some elements of performance into it, but I do it once or twice a day at the most. How would you do that? How do you do that 5 times a day or 6 sections a day?
So to touch on the first thing is, we have to be entertaining ever since MTV came out, where it was like boom, 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 boom. And that really changed things about being in the classroom. That's when it all started, pretty much, is when they came out, and then the phones came out, and you have competition. And so it was not easy. And that's why a lot of teachers, after 3 o'clock, they go home and take a nap, and then they get up and then they cook dinner or do whatever they have to do, grade papers or whatever at night. But I was never a micro planner. I was always a macro planner. And so I love telling the stories. And so that wasn't hard, and then I liked when I changed things, because seriously, I'd get so bored. That was the biggest thing. Once I got to 5 a day, some days, if it was more talking, I may not remember. A lot of times I didn't remember what I said. Have I told you guys this? I'd always ask him, have I said this before? You're not sure where you are in the thing, but it is a problem. But, I loved it so much. And so again, I'm going to go to this notebook, because I think it's the biggest thing that I did in my career, besides making the curriculum. But the cool thing about the notebook is that gives them an activity, and this is going to sound bad, but they're busy. They're doing stuff. And so I got rid of all the discipline, like monitoring for discipline. I didn't have to do that, because they're all doing, most of them. I'm going to say not all of them, we'll say 95%, were doing stuff. And that allowed me to walk around the room, get out from behind the desk and actually, talk to the kids. And not all the time it was about oceanography. It was about, whatever's important to them that time. But, and then, we try to get some oceanography in there and do that kind of thing. But I remember, I guess it was in my master's program, one of the professors said, you really got to care about your students. And I piped up, being the loudmouth that I was, that I don't have time for that. I got to teach, in biology, you have to teach 184 things in a year. And that's like one of those things is like evolution. And so you don't have time to do that. And so I piped up, I really don't have time to do all that. But then if you're creative about how you approach things, that opens up the door for time. And once you get to know the kids, they see the work that you're putting in. And so they're willing to put the work into that.
So I can see you like you're retired now, but towards the end of your career where you have, several years of experience, kind of the gravitas and just to know how to do that. Did you always feel that way, or was there did you ever get kind of early on go through like an imposter syndrome? Or I'm just more speaking from things that I know I've suffered from, is like who am I to be up here telling these people?
Oh, yeah.
But I can imagine that like a teacher of 20, 30 years is very different than a teacher with their first year.
That's why the reason is I went to middle school first, because I didn't know I knew what I knew. And so I didn't know if I could operate in a high school. And so it took me a while, but then I made friends with high school teachers, and they said, why aren't you teaching high school? And so that's when my journey started going to high school. But I mean, starting in middle school where you're teaching, sixth grade, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, it's like, I probably know more than that. So I didn't struggle with that too much. But during oceanography, though, I knew, that first day when you get the meet and greet with the parents and stuff, those people that are really invested in the students that are invested in oceanography. I knew there was probably more than a handful that knew more stuff than I did when they came in. And I actually helped. I tried to use them as much as possible. You bring in your pictures. We're going to talk about this. You bring, like, one did work with Moat Marine for like 3 summers in a row before she got to me. And I'm like, she probably knows more than me. So we just tried to do that. If there's something I didn't know about, then I would, I made enough connections with I did every single workshop I could ever find. Ask Frank. Frank did something for middle schools, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to this thing. I'm going to apply. And I just tried, and luckily they accepted me, and I'm still doing it 10 years later. So it's just experience after experience after experience. It just keeps me going. So.
Ken, did you always feel comfortable in front of a classroom?
No, because my first year I had to teach drama in middle school as an elective. So I was not comfortable. Well, actually, I got hired as a 6th grade teacher, so I had to teach language arts spelling, and I did. It took me a while, but luckily, once I did that, and that's where you learn the management and stuff like that. The first years, that's where I might not have had as much confidence. But as far as content goes, I was comfortable. I didn't have any problem. Yeah, except lecturing. I don't like lecturing, so that's boring to me because I already know what I'm saying. So, I'd rather have a discussion and see what they know and let them discover stuff and talk about it. So
I apologize. I think I must have missed this. So how did you even remind me? How did you even get the oceanography elective going? Because it's kind of cool that you kind of changed your job to what you want to do, which is pretty awesome.
It was unbelievable. Getting to talk about the ocean for 5 hours a day, I was like, and making it as cool as possible. And then even a thing to that is I made a summer oceanography program for 2 weeks. I got with my friends and said, what are the coolest things we can do in 13 days to make these kids love oceanography? And we just did it as a fun trip. And I get paid for like a summer school class, but we took them down to Florida and we went whitewater rafting, we went scuba diving, we went all this stuff. And so, because I did a good job with biology and my scores were high, and I worked with so at one high school, I actually, between middle school and high school, I quit and went to work for Zoo Atlanta. There was an opportunity to become a educational salesperson for the zoo. It did not work out at all. The business world, I resented it because that's what my dad did, I guess. And so I was not into business at all. I have no business sense whatsoever. And so they let me out of my contract in April. And so I worked through the summer doing teacher workshops. That was cool, taking them behind the scenes, going to see Willie B at the zoo and all kinds of stuff. Then school started, and I was wailing, driving to Zoo Atlanta. And so crying, and saying, I need to be in the classroom. And so I went and turned in my resignation. And so I got a job at another high school just for the partial year, because it was after Labor Day. One of the ladies I worked with there at that high school, she became the county department chair, or like for all the science in the county. And that's the one I would always go to. So it actually started with science fair project, where I was doing a science fair project in biology, one of my biology students, and they wanted to see if the project they came up with, if the amount of protein in the diet of black mollies would change the growth rate. And so she went and she supported me and got aquariums and all this stuff for my classroom. And I just started doing it with all the classes. And we did it as a whole big group project. And so that's where I really got to know her. And so then when I came to her and said, listen, once I found out there was oceanography GPS, which is the Georgia performance standards, it's like that's where you can write or develop courses as long as they follow that outline the state made. That's where I really went and I sold it to her, and I said, listen, this is what I need to do. This is what I really know. This is where I started. And so I lucked out.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because I think a lot of times, every job has its pluses and minuses, but a lot of times people will often just, it's time to look for a new job, or like I need to make a career change. They don't necessarily think, well, what can I do differently, or what can I change about my existing position? And I think oftentimes there's more latitude than people even realize.
Yeah, and that was my attitude pretty much all through education. I would spend my own. I don't mind spending my own money, because things I spend my money on for teaching, it helps me out during the day, and if it makes my job easier, then that's a great investment for me, because it's helping me out. And so I didn't mind going. I always had animals in my classroom. I remember the first year I went and found a pet store, and we got an octopus, and we put the octopus in an aquarium, and we showed him. I fed him in front of the kids and all that kind of stuff, but he cost a pretty penny. But that investment lets you do what you want to do. And so I saw no problem with that. And then it helped when I got my master's and my specialist that I had more money, but then I found other ways to do it too, grants and all that stuff. But, make it fun.
Yeah, Ken, in comparing kind of your role as a teacher to my role as a teacher, I think a really big difference is that you spend a lot more time with your students than I do, right? A college professor versus a high school teacher. And that's either a plus or minus depending on one's personality, I would assume. But at the end of the day, you get to know your students a lot better than I get to know my students. I get to know some of them. I get to know the ones that make an effort to get to know me and end up working in my lab, for example. But the vast majority of them are just faces, and I don't necessarily see them again, which I feel bad about. I would like to get to know them. So how do you feel about that? I mean, I think that, like I said, it's either a plus or a minus depending on your personality.
I was always trying to be respectful. I was always trying to do the right thing. And I tried to get them to do the right thing. And yes, I've had my encounters. I've had people threaten my life because I shut the door because they were late to class. But most of the time, I mean, how are you going to teach a kid that hates your guts? There's no reason to be like that. If some teacher tries to cram stuff down my throat, I'm not going to pay attention. And so if they, like I said before, if they see that you're invested in the class and you're passionate about the class, or you invest time and you want to know, because that when I'm in middle school, I get to know people and I'm always joking around with them and things like that. Or talking to them in between classes and things. And so that I think they see that I care. Like one of the big things, and it's a little thing, but it turned out to be a big thing, is I'd keep a stool out in the hallway, and in between every classroom or class change in high school, I'd sit out there and talk and say hi to people that I don't even know, and just say, hey, I like your shirt or whatever, and just trying to be personable. And because that's not my personality, I'm not a personable, I'm a hermit. And so, I forced myself to do that, but in the classroom, I didn't have a problem with it at all. It just came naturally.
And there are some real benefits to getting to know your students deeply. You form a relationship with them that doesn't necessarily end when they graduate.
Oh, no.
You probably see your students regularly and still hear.
So I was this is a crazy story. I was cleaning out my basement. It was like 3 weeks ago. And I found a styrofoam ball model of a cell. And luckily with Facebook, I'm friends with the girl that made that. And I hadn't seen it in I taught for 37 years, and she was probably year 3 or 4 in middle school. And I was like, I took a picture of it and I texted her. I said, Elizabeth, I think this is yours. Did you make this? She goes, it looks really familiar, but that was too long ago. I don't remember. I can't believe you still have it. And I didn't tell her that it was in a corner in my basement, but no, yeah, you definitely do. I have, my wife is amazed at how many people still come up and talk to me, Mr. Leach, how you doing? And that kind of thing. And so it's really crazy because Gwinnett County is it's one of the largest school districts in Georgia. And it's just a small world. It's really cool when they come up and say, and give you kudos. And now with Facebook, I have connections with a lot of my past students and that have become teachers as well. And so I still have, the coolest thing is they'll text me. They're at the beach and they'll text me and go, what is this? We didn't talk about this when we were in class. Can you explain what this is?
I think it's very cool. People remember their teachers,
Yeah.
the bad ones and the good ones.
Well, when you were talking and said your high school teachers motivated you, and I don't want to be negative in this, but the biggest motivation. So Father Heckle was my biology teacher in high school in 10th grade in an all boys Catholic school. And he was really regimented and people didn't think he was nice. And just because he was quiet and stuff, but he made us do a notebook and draw pictures and do all that kind of stuff. So that was really motivating to me. But the other one was, it was in junior high out in Oregon. Like Oregon's gorgeous, just like Montana is. And we'd never go outside. We'd never do anything outside. We'd never do anything except read the book and answer questions. And I questioned the teacher, and it didn't go well. My parents were in there just because they thought I was being disruptive. And he was a big motivating factor for me. I was like, if I become a teacher, I would never teach this way. And so I always remember, and I think it was Mr. Mathis. I know he's not around anymore, but he was a really nice guy, but he just.
No, that's true. And I've had similar experiences. I think you remember teachers for a variety of different reasons. You remember the interesting personalities. As you described, you remember the ones that didn't do so well. And if you're going in the direction of teaching, you can use them as lessons for how to do better. But the ones that really stick in my mind, the ones I remember the most are the ones I really learned from. Like the ones, and those are the ones that challenged me, like the ones that I often got angry with at the end of the class period because they gave me homework when I wasn't expecting it or something along those lines. But, those are the ones that I ultimately end up remembering most fondly. They made a difference in my learning and they became part of my personality. I think that's amazing that can happen. So Ken, I don't want to necessarily focus on anything too negative here, but I do want this to be a resource for people that are considering the profession. And there's always some personalities that fit really well with a profession, and there's always some that don't jive so well. And I'm sure you've seen a wide spectrum of people work alongside you over the years. and you have a pretty good sense of what makes a good teacher and what doesn't. So maybe talk a little bit about the challenges of the trade so that people are just aware of what's in front of them. Like what do you think are the hardest parts for most people to overcome?
Well, you have to have a thick skin just because there are those students that are there for the wrong reasons or they don't want to be there at all. And so they might call you something or just disrespect you in some way and nothing major or, and you just, or especially in today's world where if they're allowed to have phones, then they're on their phone and not paying attention to you. And it's like, hey, I put time in planning this. Let's look. That's one. Before I got my graduate degrees, money was one, but that hopefully that's changing. The biggest problem with me, and I said, I didn't ask questions, I didn't ask permission, I just went and did what I wanted to do. So it's funny when I started working, it was near the end of my middle school job. But by then I had, I don't know, 15 tanks in my room, and it had spiders and tarantulas and no mammals though. And someone came in from the county and said, "Don't you know we have an animal policy in Gwinnett County?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I don't know that." And so with me, luckily I had some really good administrators early in my career, but I don't know if I'd still be teaching if it wasn't for my last administration. And I hate to say that, but it just got so crazy that it wasn't good for my mental health anymore. And that's what made me, put down the chalk. So you have to find if you're going into a classroom or into a school, you need to ask questions when they start, when you get interviewed and all that, you need to ask, figure out what's a good working environment for you personally, and then ask the administration questions to try to delve into how they look. Because, some schools I worked at made you turn in lesson plans, some don't.
Like a micromanaging?
Micromanaging. And so that's why I left, is because I was told what to teach. I was told. So my class, just some other background is I helped write some tests for UGA. Like I took oceanography at UGA as just part of my specialist, marine sciences and the beginning classes. But she saw that I knew what I was doing, and so I helped her write some tests and showed her test questions and stuff like that. And we wrote a lab manual. I used those tests when we started oceanography. The tests were the hardest part. I mean, really hard. They were college level, fill in the blank tests. You got to know this. That's when I started, and that was not with a notebook. It was really difficult. But then we started using the notebook, and I had taught equipment and technology unit, like it was the second or third unit in the year. And my administration came to me and said, "You can't test that. You don't need to test that. It's just memorization or whatever." And they've already written everything down in their notebook. So it's not even that. It's just a participation test. And I'm saying, I was like, I'm a smart person. I know that that's a simple test if they do the work. But all the other ones that are super, super hard, this allows them to get a feather in their cap. Allows them to go home and say, "Mom, look, I got 100 on a test." And it helps their average, even out. If they bomb a test, it's a canceling factor. And so they said, "Nope, you can't do that." And so those kind of micromanaging things, I just can't deal with. It's just like, I'm sorry. Yeah. I know I've been teaching at that point, I was teaching over 30 years. And I was like, you know what? I think they need this. This gives them confidence that if they do put the stuff in the notebook, they are going to get a good grade on the test. But we turned this half-inch composition book into a 2 or 3 inch oceanography book. The first semester was oceanography. The second one was marine biology. And they were so proud of that. I mean, that wasn't a challenge. It's just that's why I needed that test for them an easy test to show them if you did the work in the notebook, you're going to get great grades. And it was funny because down the road, those kids that did an awesome notebook, they usually did not open their notebook for the test. They didn't have to. They already knew it because they actually experienced the stuff while they were doing it. And it may not be picking up the animal or doing anything like that, but they got to do stuff like I tried to make a pop-up of an anemone, a pop-up of a clam, a pop-up of a squid. That way, they experience something and they can remember doing it in the notebook. And that's how I learned is, I'm super visual. And so if I do something and do my hands on it, then I'm pretty much going to remember it.
No, I've seen an example of your notebook before, and it's just brilliant, actually. It's simple but brilliant. And what I remember when looking at it is there's an eclectic mix of information, and it can be in the form of lists, it can be in the form of drawings, it can be in the form of three-dimensional art pieces that are glued in or taped into the notebook. They're just different media that a student is kind of using to teach themselves, but at the same
Right.
time create a graphical interface or word interface that others can learn from as well. And that's a lost art, to be honest, but it's something that's been part of education forever. Like if you think
Yeah.
about Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
just similar to what you described. And one of the products from my college years that I am most proud of was a field notebook that I kept while taking a field geology course in Death Valley. And the instructions were more or less exactly what you've been describing. Document what you see, describe what you see, write notes about what you see. And it ended up to being such a useful exercise, especially the drawing of things, because it really forced you to look at the world. And I
Right.
remember being incredibly proud of that. And I still have it someplace, and it's still a good resource. I haven't looked at it for a really long time, but it's a brilliant concept. And yeah, I can see why you're so proud of it. I know we're getting a little short on time here, Ken. I think this has been a really fun discussion. I like talking to people that do something kind of similar to what I do because I feel like I can actually say something useful. Um, and you've done it.
I've never known you not to be able to talk, Frank.
I know. That's true. Which is actually kind of interesting. And sorry, I'm going to come back to one more point that I think is embedded in what you said that is related to that. You made the comment that you're a bit of a hermit, but yet you're in a profession that from the outside looks like you're a people person. You thrive on social interaction. And I think that may be just a perception, and if so, that's fine. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think that that's kind of common where you have a lot of folks in a profession that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be there based on their underlying personality types.
Right.
A lot of introverts, a lot of hermits, if you will, I've seen them in the classroom and they are wonderful. They almost adopt a different personality when they're in the classroom. And to some degree, I'm kind of like that. I'm probably more of a hermit than you are. But when I'm in the classroom, I'm a very different person. Like I said before, a bit of a performer. And I think that's good for folks to know about. Like you don't necessarily have to slot into a specific personality type
Right.
to do
Right.
really well on a job. You just need to know what the job requires. And everybody's kind of flexible and can get to that point if they try.
I just say I'm more comfortable outside by myself than I am with
Too, yeah.
like in a room full of people. No, I'd rather be just walking through the woods or.
So Ken, do you think you're kind of destined to be a teacher, or were so I'm
Yes.
remembering back to what you said earlier, like you were a naturalist and you were kind of looking for jobs and there wasn't much. So how do I frame this question? Like I'm trying to think of like let's just say you're a computer scientist and you could easily get a job as a computer, like writing programs or something. Do you think that you would still fall into the teaching profession?
You mean if I got a degree, a different degree?
I don't. It's a poorly framed question. I guess what I'm saying is if there
If
were
I got an architecture degree,
if there were jobs for naturalists out there, that are
Well,
as prevalent as there are for like a computer science major today. Do you think you still would have gone into teaching, or do you think you would have gone the path of kind of what you're saying, like you feel very
well, it's in the naturalist thing where you're learning about nature and sharing that with other people. So it's kind of, that's not a far stretch. But
Yeah.
my mom was a teacher. She taught in community college with textiles and sewing and home ec stuff. And she just explained stuff so well to me. And it wasn't just because she was a teacher. Yeah, but just swim team, ski
Yeah.
instructor, all that kind of stuff. It just one thing after another. I like showing people what to do or how to do. And the bad thing about that is I think my way is the right way all the time. And so my wife, when I try to teach my wife, it doesn't work out all the time. But so I think I was meant to be a teacher.
So I guess maybe that's kind of getting at because I do think that a lot of people end up in their job, kind of like what Frank was saying earlier, I mean, you're young when you're in school and you're trying to figure out your way. So I think a lot of times people don't necessarily put a whole lot of thought into what they ought to do or what they were meant to do. And so they can kind of get, fast forward however many years and they're in the job that they're in.
I think your story is really pretty special, Ken. I don't think everybody starts on the path that they were meant to be on. Probably
lucky, not
Yeah.
special, lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whatever it is, it's really great. But I mean, it seems like you knew from a relatively early age that teaching others brought meaning to you. And
Yeah, well, and that's what when I was doing swim team and everything, I think that's what helped drive it. Also, I heard that all the time. You're such a great teacher. You know how to teach. You gave such good instructions and all that kind of stuff. And so that got probably in the back of my mind, and that probably really influenced me a lot as well.
yeah, that's a powerful lesson, and I'm a little bit envious that you stumbled across the answer to that so early. Not everybody can be a teacher. I think a lot of people have sufficient content knowledge. Not everybody can communicate it in the right way and provide the right stories and analogies and also the right excitement. I think
Right.
the passion that it takes to get others interested in a subject is fairly substantial. And I've seen that in you, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you tonight, Ken. So I think we've been here for a while now. I certainly enjoyed this conversation, and I want to thank you, Ken, for spending some time with us. It may not be
I enjoy it.
Yeah, it may not be the last time we call on you. I'd love to see your notebook in a little bit more depth.
You need to come to Sapelo this summer.
I do. It's on my calendar, which doesn't necessarily mean that I'll get there, but it's on my calendar. Yeah, but I've been with you in the field before, and it's a pretty cool experience. Thank you again, Ken.
No problem. Not a problem at all. I enjoy it.